Okay, well, morning everyone. My name is Jenny Young. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to speak. I'm a research fellow from Edinburgh Napier University. I'm also a part-time PhD student, and this research will be focusing on my PhD. So just a bit of an overview. I'm going to give you a kind of context to my research, which is looking at what it's like to care for someone with cancer. I'm going to kind of show you some of the literature. I recently carried out a systematic review, which I'll show you some of my findings, and then I'm kind of going to end on the kind of what's the point, why I really feel this is an area to look at. So my research looks at the experience of caring for someone with cancer. By a carer, I mean a non-professional carer, so that is usually the spouse or the next of kin or the loved one of the person with cancer. In the literature, this person is called a carer or a caregiver. Recently, the charity Macmillan Cancer, they produced a report only just a couple of weeks ago, actually, estimating that in the UK at the moment, there are 1.1 million people who support someone with a cancer diagnosis. In terms of the resource that they provide, it's absolutely massive in terms of the practical, social, emotional, physical support, and that's costed at about £14.5 billion a year. So they save the health system a lot of money. But despite these figures, actually a lot of carers remain hidden, and this is due to the term carer. A lot of people understandably don't relate to this word carer. If that is your spouse, your loved one, your friend, you would naturally provide this care to them. You wouldn't kind of bracket yourself in this carer role. So actually a lot of carers remain hidden. There are about 2 million people with cancer at the moment in the UK. Obviously not everyone will have a carer, but that just kind of shows the gap between the amount of people with cancer and the number of carers. And men in particular remain hidden as they don't identify with this label carer. So the Charity Carers Trust, a couple of years ago, they produced a report specifically looking at male carers. There are less male carers. In terms of people who care for cancer, there are about 38% male carers. But in terms of all carers, so all people caring for someone with an illness, it's actually about 42% of males. So it's actually not as less as we think it is. And it's increasing as well. And this report produced by Carers Trust, they kind of looked at the experiences of males, and 53% of males feel that actually their needs are quite different to female carers. Some of the challenges that they perceive is a lack of recognition by society and professionals, possibly less likely to seek support, find it quite a challenge to take on some of the domestic tasks, and the challenge of balancing work and care. In terms of the support that male carers identified as wanting, they wanted access to breaks from caring, discreet and interpersonal support, I think that's quite an interesting use of language, and financial and benefits advice. Now some of those things I don't think are unique to the male experience. I'm sure females would also want a break from caring or financial advice, but I think some of those things do seem quite particular to the male experience. Going through the report, there's a couple of quotes here which I think identify quite well why this is maybe a different challenge for males. So the first one, I believe our society look upon male carers differently to female carers. It is often expected of a daughter, granddaughter to provide care, whereas a male relative is often thought of as a wage earner. I've often had negative responses when I mention that I care for family members, as it is an effeminate thing to do. And the second quote, in my position, I'm 72, retired, always being the man about the house, DIY. I can put my hand to most things, but never cooking. Suddenly I've got to learn, my wife can't do it any longer. So I think these two quotes emphasise two things. This idea that society doesn't see male carers as being a carer possibly, that they're kind of hidden, and that it's a female thing to do. And possibly maybe for older carers, this idea that the role reversal, if their wife is maybe always caring for them, and then suddenly they care for their wife, domestic tasks really will be a challenge. So that's kind of where I was in terms of my thinking, and that's why I wanted to start to explore this a little bit further. The kind of wider literature on caring overwhelmingly describes caring as being a burden. There's lots of focus in the literature on anxiety and distress, and caring is a very negative thing. In terms of the theory, there's a model called stress process model that suggests that when carers kind of meet the caring experience, they see it as a threat or a challenge, and then this generates stress. So that's kind of where the literature was. Understandably, caring, I'm sure, would be very, very hard. But for me as a researcher, I felt we weren't quite getting the whole experience, so I wanted to explore this a little bit further and really try and find if there was a bit more of a research gap. So positive psychology suggests that we should look at the characteristics that enable someone to thrive, rather than focusing on negative attributes. And there's a kind of field of research developed over maybe the last 10 years ago that suggests actually you can get positive outcomes from the caring experience. And this, to me, intuitively, this sat well with me because it describes caring more as a kind of multifaceted, multi-dimensional thing that occurs. And that seems right. We're very different people in different contexts and different situations. So for me, that I felt I found a research gap, and I wanted to explore this a bit further. So in terms of my systematic review, and this is how I came to focus on male carers. I carried out kind of standard process for a systematic review. My search terms related to caring, cancer, and positive caring experiences. I used standard electronic databases to search: Cochrane, CINAHL, PsycInfo. I reviewed and I appraised all my articles, and then I eventually came out with 52 articles. They were predominantly quantitative, but there were some qualitative articles as well. And I excluded commentary pieces and grey literature. So, in terms of my results, I found 4 main themes from my papers, and I called these the attributes of positive caring experiences. The first one related to personal resources, and that was the kind of characteristics that people had that enabled positive caring experiences to occur. So they were things like optimism, self-esteem, self-efficacy. The second finding I called finding meaning, and this was essentially about the appraisal process that someone goes through when they encounter the caring experience. I spoke earlier about the stress process theory, where people see caring as a threat and a challenge, but for some people they appraised it in a different way, and it was seen as an opportunity to find something positive, and it was very much related to the personal characteristics that they had. The third main theme within the papers related to the social context. This was mentioned in nearly all the papers in some way, and in kind of 2 main ways. The first one is that if the carer has social support themselves, they're more likely to experience a positive experience. And the second one was the context in which the caring takes place is very, very, very important and often overlooked in literature. So that might relate to people's motivations to care for someone, and also the relationship between the carer and the person they're caring for. Because understandably, if your motivations are fueled with resentment and you don't have a very good relationship with the person you care for, you're very unlikely to have a positive caring experience. And that's really important, but I think it was overlooked. And the fourth finding is related to gender, and this is obviously part of the reason why I'm here and talking, but for me this was really interesting but very, very complex and raised lots of questions, and I'll talk you through some of the findings just now. So within the papers that I found, again, as Martin mentioned this morning, not all papers specifically look at gender as a kind of primary research question. It's mentioned, but it's often a little bit cursory. But for those who did kind of spend some time looking at it in depth, there was very, very little consensus across the papers whether being male or female was associated with a greater likelihood of having a positive caring experience. There was a meta-analysis done in 2008, and this was a bit of a kind of springboard for lots of studies from it. And on the surface, it appeared that female carers are having a worse caring time, and this was due to the fact that this meta-analysis identified things like females might have higher rates of depression, anxiety, lower life satisfaction, and lower quality of life than men. So a lot of papers, obviously a meta-analysis when you get to that stage is important, and a lot of research at that time seemed to suggest, well, females, this is a worse experience for females. However, the kind of counter-argument to that is possibly males are less likely to report the distress. Are females more comfortable identifying the distress? Is it more socially acceptable for females to fill in a questionnaire and say, actually, I'm having a really crap time? Like, you know, that's, I think, a real question. And as, you know, a lot of the speakers have said this morning, gender is socially constructed, so this concept is really quite complex, and it made comparison across the study very difficult. An example of that, I've just pulled out 3 papers that I found in the review, all from very different countries, all finding quite different things as well. So Kim et al. 2007 found that males were more likely than females to appraise the care experience as boosting their self-esteem. That was done in America. A few years later, Kang et al. In Korea found that females were more likely than males to perceive feelings of reward from the caring experience. And then in 2013, Usher found that females were more likely to feel feelings of reward and strength. However, also negative changes in the relationship, neglect of self, and social isolation. And males were more likely to experience increased closeness with the person, but also the burden of additional responsibilities. So, as you can see, the papers are very mixed, very different findings, and actually all the studies are looking at slightly different things as well. We've got this idea of kind of feelings of reward that's mirrored in a couple of the papers, but they're all really quite different study designs as well. So this kind of left me at this point feeling quite confused, and you know, my conclusion to this is actually this is really quite a complex picture. The context is important, culture is very important, the theoretical position that the researcher takes is important. Again, as I said, a lot of researchers use the stress process model as their theoretical underpinnings, so it's probably not surprising they would suggest that carers experience something negative. However, if that is not the theoretical position, you might perceive something differently. The study design also is very important. In that Usher et al. Study, that was a qualitative study, so you're seeing lots of different feelings coming out of this, whereas the Kim et al. Study was a correlational study. And then obviously you have the argument that correlation doesn't make causation, so it was difficult, and it is a complex picture, but for me that was a real gift, because I thought actually I really want to explore this further. I think I found a research gap in terms of this positive aspect of caring, and the gender theme is really muddy, and I want to go a wee bit further with this. So in terms of broader thinking about cancer caring masculinity, just to kind of conclude and say where I am with my thinking just now, there is a lot of literature on the impact of chronic illness on your identity. This has predominantly been done from the patient perspective, but again there's been a little bit of research on the carer perspective, so this is where I'd like to take this. Men may find it difficult to adapt to this caring role due to this idea of socially constructed caring roles. Men may then enact a gendered style of caregiving. There's a bit of literature on hegemonic masculinity, and that would make males less likely to talk about their feelings, and again lots of the things that we've heard about this morning, and that obviously may have a detrimental effect on their well-being. There's a few papers that suggest male carers are likely to experience something called self-silencing, which in caring can come out as an almost kind of obsessive style of caring, obsessively caring for the person, but not talking about your own feelings and silencing them. And is it more complex than having a kind of dominant style of masculinity? Do men resist it, or do they engage with it? Is it more complex than that? Yes, I'm pretty certain it will be. Then that's what I would like to explore further with my research. So in my PhD, I've got 2 main questions that I'd like to explore. I'm using narrative research because, again, there's not a lot of research in this area, and I would really like to hear the stories that people tell, just because it's very unstructured, and I think that's where we need to start with this research. So I'd like to look at the positive aspects of caring, and also, again, this idea that masculinity might be constructed and performed for me in the research interview setting, and how does that impact on what people talk about. So just to finish again, this kind of so what, why do I think this is a worthy area to look at? I do think there are aspects of care that are specific to males. Support is associated with positive aspects of caring, but if men are less likely to seek support, are they less likely to experience a positive experience? Men are less likely to access psychological therapy. How are they coping? Will they disclose these kind of things to me in my research? I genuinely believe possibly we should look at interventions that are building positives rather than reducing negatives, but to do that, we need to know what the positives are. And this is an under-researched area. Carers are under-researched, but male carers are specifically under-researched. So I would really like to provide a voice to these men, which is another reason why I'd like to use narrative research, because I think it's a perfect method to allow men to tell their stories. I can email slides around if anyone would like any of the references. If anyone would like the full systematic review, it's currently in press and will be published in the European Journal of Cancer Care, hopefully shortly.